Time for that. You don't cook?
I had it yesterday. And that's
Yeah?
like yesterday was like, okay, like, yes, Chipotle kind of thing. But like, I had it too much.
Yeah, having it too much, you kind of get tired because I was like eating it. I was like, oh my god, that's it.
You can't eat Taco Bell?
I don't want it no more. No, I don't eat Taco Bell. I went to Smash Burger yesterday. You guys know where Smash Burger is?
Right.
It's a new burger place. It's supposed to be the #1 burger. Smash Burger is in Milford.
Yeah.
So my boyfriend ordered a chicken sandwich, and the bread had mold on it.
Okay, never going.
For real, it had mold on it, and I'm like, I just pushed.
You know what's good? Five Guys.
Oh my god! But I don't like the peanut oil they use. No, the peanut oil they use peanut oil to make it. Yeah. You know what's good? What is it again? It's in Westport. It's not Smash. It's really good. It's on the Post Road.
Chapter 5.
Shake Shack. It is so good. Like the burger is good. It's a little flat, but it tastes real good.
There's one in
fries
there,
and then the shake and everything. Yeah.
I could. Is it okay if I leave it on the board though?
No.
Is it easier for you if it's on the board?
It is. It's a little bit easier for me if it's on the board. That way I can highlight what I'm talking about.
Sure.
You have copies in front of you. I believe this is on its own slide. So you hopefully have this image pretty big. It is in your textbook also.
Second page.
You know why, but I'm not.
You can open it. All right, so we're looking at the integumentary system. The integumentary system's major organ is the skin. Okay, the skin is the largest organ in the body. The largest organ in the body. The skin is an organ. It's composed of multiple tissue types. You already know some of them. Skin is divided into two regions. The epidermis, which is here, and the dermis, which is here. Epidermis is on top or more superficial to the deeper dermis. Two layers or two regions of the skin. The epidermis and the dermis. The tissue of the epidermis, you know already. What is it? Okay, it's epithelial tissue. It covers or lines the body, and it is in particular stratified squamous epithelial tissue. We look at this whole area here. These cells are in more than one layer, and they're squashed. There's multiple layers of squashed cells sitting on top of this basement membrane, and the basement membrane looks like a wave. It's one of the key features that I said to look for. The cells on the very top of the basement membrane, this kind of first layer of cells that you see here, are living, alive, and multiplying. These are cells in the deepest strata, deepest layer of the epidermis, and that's called the stratum basal, or the stratum basal, basal layer, the basement layer. That layer is sitting right on top of the basement membrane. So it is the first layer of epithelial cells on top of the basement membrane. It's called the stratum basal. You can see these cells very clearly when you look at the microscope. And I have focused already a slide in just to make the lab go a little faster. In the back of the room with the pointer on the stratum basal. So you can see the cells there, you can see the nucleus, you know those cells are alive and they're dividing. The other thing that you can see within those cells is you can see the process of mitosis going on. You might see some cells that look like they're in metaphase, some cells that look like they're in anaphase, and so on. Because this is a layer of cells that's actively dividing. And as these cells actively divide, they're essentially moving upwards towards the surface of your skin. So this very top region of the skin is composed of dead skin cells. This stratum is called the stratum corneum. And it came from, originally, the cells at the basal layer, going through mitosis and dividing into daughter cells constantly, and those cells just being pushed up towards the top. As they're being pushed up to the surface of the skin, they're dying. They're losing their nucleus, they're losing their organelles. They're essentially hollow plasma membranes that are filled only with the protein keratin at this point. Okay. Now, if you've ever had a corn on the surface of your skin, sometimes you might get them on your feet. For example, it's this dense, hard area of skin cells. That's mostly just plasma membrane with keratin protein within it. So the very top of the slide, when you look at this under the microscope, is going to look like the cells are coming off. You've seen the slide already, you just didn't know that it might have been skin. Okay? The cells in this layer are often shedding. They're coming off constantly. So looking more closely at the epidermis then, the 5 strata, the most superficial is the stratum corneum. That's what I think you're going to notice first when you look at this underneath the microscope, because it will look like it's falling apart. The cells are coming off. As well, above that is an area that is just white open space, which is the lumen, because this is epithelial tissue we're looking at. Okay? And the very deepest strata should be probably the next thing that you should identify. It's typically the darker in terms of staining. You can clearly see the nuclei. Some of them are going through mitosis, and that's the stratum basal. The strata in the middle, because I did say that there were 5, are going to be a little more tricky to identify, but you will be able to do it because of the positioning of where the cells are. And I'll show you the next slide to make that more clear. Okay, so this is a close-up of just the epidermis. Just the epidermis is what we're looking at over here. At the very top, you can see the peach-colored cells. That's the stratum corneum. That's the most superficial strata where all the dead cells are. At the very bottom, see these cells here? They're more of an orangey color, almost like a sorbet. These cells are the stratum basal. This is the basal cell layer, the one that's going through mitosis. And you can see, in fact, this cell right here looks like it has 2 nuclei, one at either end of the cell. The chromosomes are kind of scrunched all together, encased within a nuclear envelope. So what phase of mitosis is this cell in? It's in telophase. Good. And this one over here, this one you should be able to recognize as well. That one's in anaphase. This one right here. So you can see, hopefully very clearly, this basal layer that's sitting on the basement membrane and the stratum corneum. Now what we're going to look at is what's in between that. So deep to the stratum corneum, you see a layer of clear cells. These are also dead cells. This is the stratum lucidum, where lucid means clear or transparent. And this is a layer of cells that's going to be very important to us because it is only found in thick skin. Thick skin as opposed to thin skin. Thick skin is found in the palms of your hand, for example, the soles of your feet. That's thick skin. Thin skin would be perhaps your eyelids, right? The area on top of your head, your scalp, the skin of your scalp. That would be more thin skin. You'll only see this stratum lucidum, this clear or transparent layer, in areas of thick skin. So truly, it's only the thick skin areas that have 5 strata. The others have 4. With me? Yes? Okay. So deep to the stratum lucidum is the stratum granulosum. On the diagram, you can tell very easily that it is granulosum. They've colored it differently. On the microscope slide, it's more difficult, right? And you can see that the slide here has been stained, so the epithelial cells are purple. You can tell stratum corneum and stratum basal very clearly, but it's difficult to see the stratum granulosum. What I would like you to look for are these little granules. They look like polka dots inside of the cells. Stratum granulosum. It has these what look like little granules on the inside of the cell. So now you can see the stratum lucidum here. It's this almost transparent layer. It's stained a little bit from the purple. If you look deep to that, you'll see a layer of cells that is more dark. Do you all agree with that? It looks more dark, these cells, than these over here. Okay, so this is the stratum granulosum. Deep to that one is this larger layer of cells here. Could be up to 50 cell layers thick, but it could be very thick. This layer of cells is called the spinosum. The term spinosum, you might be thinking of spines. The cells look like they have spines coming off of the plasma membrane, and in fact, that's really not true. That's what happens when we take a section of the skin, fix it to a slide, and stain it so we can look at it. The spines really do not exist normally within the cell, but this is called the stratum spinosum. And you can see that it's a pretty large layer. It's on top of the basal cell layer and underneath the granulosum cell layer. The cells also look pretty large within this layer. Do you all agree? They look pretty large. They all have a nucleus, so are they alive or dead? Alive. They're alive. Okay. And again, it's the cells here in the basal layer going through mitosis that's producing these cells. And as the cells in the basal layer continue the process of mitosis, one mitosis and another one, then these cells are constantly pushed upwards. So the cells here in spinosum right now, maybe a month from now, might be up here at the very top in the corneum. Okay? But as they move up, they are dying. The majority of the cells that you see here are cells called keratinocytes. Remember the site at the end? We talked about the chondrocyte and the osteocyte earlier on with the tissue chapter. So these cells are primarily keratinocytes that are producing the protein keratin, and the keratin is kind of filling the cell. There are other cells, though, interdispersed into all these keratinocytes. There are cells, you can see, I'll move this over a little bit here, like this cell. You know immediately that it's different just because of the coloring of the cell, but also if you look at the cell shape, it doesn't look like the keratinocytes surrounding it. This cell is called a Langerhans cell, and it's going to be important when we talk more about the immune system later on. It's kind of like one of those macrophage that hang out in a particular tissue and kind of stand guard in a tissue, detect any pathogens that might be there. So also at the bottom, yep, give me 1 second. Look at the purple cell here, this Merkel cell. That's another kind of special cell that we'll come back to later. It's going to be involved in the sensation of touch. We haven't talked about the special senses yet. Obviously, skin is closely tied to the special sense of touch. But these Merkel cells will correspond with the nerves that allow you to sense when someone is touching you or when something is touching you or crawling on your skin. Odette, you had a question? So all of these cells here is all stratified squamous epithelial cells, with the exception of this special cell over here and this special one over here. You will not really be able to see the Langerhans cells or the Merkel cells underneath the microscope. Okay, so that's not going to be something that I'll have you identify for your practical. Melanocytes is the other special type of cell. You can see it nicely on the diagram because they've colored it differently. It looks differently. It has these long extensions coming from it that almost look like cilia, but they're not cilia. Okay? This melanocyte is a special type of cell because it produces the pigment melanin. Heard of melanin? It is melanin that gives us our skin color. And in fact, every individual has melanocytes that are producing a certain amount of melanin. A lighter skin color or a darker skin color, that really doesn't matter. You have the same number of melanocytes within your skin. The difference is how much melanin they're producing. Okay, so a darker skinned individual, melanocytes would be producing more melanin than a lighter skinned individual would be. An albino would not really be producing any of the melanin. When a lighter skinned individual lays out in the sun, trying to get a tan, your skin color changes as it's exposed to the sun. This sunlight will actually stimulate the production of melanin in the melanocytes. So the more sunlight you're exposed to, the more pigment, melanin, they're going to make. And they do that because it's a protection to your body. The melanin pigment, the darker color of your cells, protects you from the UV light. So you laying in the sun and actually getting tan from the sun is your body's way of protecting you from the harmful rays of the sun. I'm not saying, go and lay in the sun 24 hours a day in the hottest time, I'm not saying that, but everyone has the same number of melanocytes. It's the pigment melanin and the amount of it that's produced that causes the different skin colorations. So it's basically the melanocytes in particular areas don't produce melanin. So you might have a patch of skin that the melanocytes are not producing melanin and it looks albino. And then you might have another area of skin where they are producing some amounts or they're producing more than in others. Yeah. I think that, Michael Jackson, I think, was a very famous person that had that. Okay, so melanocyte as well, I won't have you identify that underneath the microscope, but you should be able to clearly see the epidermis and the 5 strata of the thick skin. The other thing that you can see from this particular slide is a sweat gland moving up through the surface of the epidermis. I'm going to flip back to the previous picture, if I can again, to show you that more clearly. Okay, here's a sweat gland right here. Can you all see that? Yes? So I'm kind of in the border there, and I'm going to move that board over a little bit here. So here's the sweat gland. Okay, bless you. The sweat gland is obviously producing sweat. Sweat glands are within your skin to help to regulate body temperature. Okay? They're going to produce and release sweat onto the surface of your skin, and as it evaporates, it's meant to cool you off. Right? So it's a way to regulate your body temperature. This region of the sweat gland here, at the very top of the skin, where it opens up to the skin, is called the pore. Sometimes you can actually see, if you go for a facial or something, you might be able to see the pores within your skin. Okay? If bacteria moves into the pore, you get what we would commonly call as a pimple. Okay? Same thing with the hair follicle. We can have bacteria that move into that. And so you might see those inflamed or red. But we really want to have this pore be nice and open. Okay? Be nice and clear of debris. Just overall cleanliness and taking a shower, rubbing the surface of your skin will help alleviate any of the bacteria from moving within your pores. But there is always bacteria on the surface of your skin. The skin is a major protective mechanism for your body to prevent you from all of that bacteria. Just from the amount of cells layered in the epidermis alone, that's a huge protection for your body. You saw the number of cells before from the microscope slide that I showed you earlier, that there was at least 30 layers of cells, easy, in the epidermis alone, not to mention getting down here. Okay? So skin is also a protective mechanism for the body because of all of those layers of cells. But the sweat pore, the major region of the sweat pore is in the deeper region of the skin, which is the dermis. Whereas this portion, the duct, and then the pore itself, comes up through the dermis and through the epidermis of the skin. And that's what you saw if you flip back to that purple colored microscope slide, where it looked like circles, almost like bubbles, moving upwards. That's regions of this sweat gland that are moving upwards to get up to the top surface of the skin. This sweat gland and the duct along with it is epithelial tissue. We said that this was stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Down here, since we're looking at a gland, you would see more of a cuboidal shape to the epithelial tissue. There's other epithelial tissue down here too. If you look at the hair follicle, right around the hair follicle, this is one of the oil glands or sebaceous glands within the skin. This is also epithelial tissue. What was the major tissue type of the reticular region of the dermis? Do you remember? Okay, how about the papillary region? Do you remember that? It was connective tissue. If you remember, it was connective tissue. So in the papillary region of the dermis, which is this more superficial region, it was areolar connective tissue that you'll find there. And in the reticular region of the dermis, it was the dense, irregular connective tissue that you'll find primarily here. But interdispersed in between the connective tissue is epithelial tissue in the dermis. The hair follicle, the sebaceous glands, the sweat glands, for example, are all epithelial tissue. Surrounding all of that, we've got blood vessels, okay, which are lined with epithelial tissue and filled with blood, which is a connective tissue. We have nervous tissue, which are these yellow lines. These are all the sensory receptors or the dendrites of neurons. You can see some of them here, these yellow extensions moving around the hair follicle. Again, these are sensory receptors, dendrites, that move around each of your hair follicles. So if this hair was in a location that I didn't want it to be, I could take it out, right? I could tweeze it, tweeze your eyebrows, or when I pull that hair out with the tweezer, it hurts. Okay, most of the time it will hurt because the nerve endings wrapped around this hair follicle are sensing the position of the hair follicle, and then they sense that there's nothing there. They're like, ah, what did you do to me? Okay, and that's the pain from when you're pulling out hair. And then we've also already looked at this muscle here, which is a smooth muscle. So also in the dermis, we have smooth muscle. This is the erector pili muscle that we talked a little bit about already in regulating the body temperature as well, especially when you get cold, because this muscle will contract when you get cold, and cause the hairs on your skin to stand up, trapping heat within them and holding the heat close to the surface of your body. So just looking at the dermis, we have all the tissue types there. We have epithelial tissue, we have connective tissue, which is the basic dense irregular connective tissue, as well as blood. We have muscle tissue, this smooth muscle on the erector pili, and we also have the nervous tissue, which is the yellow. Is everyone kind of with me so far? Yeah? All right, so 2 layers to the skin. Beneath the skin, we are looking at the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer. It's not a true layer of the skin, it's below the skin. Hypodermis, below, underneath the dermis. What's the majority of the tissue that you will see here? Adipose tissue. Adipose tissue, type of connective tissue, otherwise known as fat, right? Fat tissue.
So is the hypodermis and subcutaneous the same thing, or is it different?
It is the same. It is the same term. And sometimes I will even call it sub-Q, which is just an abbreviation. Yeah. So we have our hypodermis here. We have the epi. I started to write this before. The epidermis. And in the middle is the dermis. All right, now look closely at the strata within the epidermis. Can you tell the individual strata from this diagram? It's kind of hard to do, okay? What I hope you see is the stratum corneum, the most superficial, and the stratum basale, because it's a darker layer. Okay, can you at least see those?
Yes.
Good. So look below the stratum basale. There's the wave I was referring to before. Okay, the wave with the basement membrane. Immediately below this wave, this region here, is called the papillary region of the dermis. And papilla means nipple-like, so it looks like nipples coming up from the region. It is only in this area where you will see the areolar connective tissue. Okay, and on the slide, it's really going to be a difficult thing to find because often there are blood vessels within this area and special receptors, which are dendrites of neurons. Okay. These yellow structures are those dendrites. We call them free nerve endings when they do not have a wrapping or coating around them. That's a capsule. For example, these ones here that look like branches, those are free nerve endings. There's no wrapping around that. But up here, the yellow structures, they have this coating, they have this wrapping all around them. Those are called encapsulated nerve endings. These help with the sensation of touch as well. And they're called Meissner corpuscles. Okay, Meissner. You've got the labels there for you as well. Free nerve endings do not have this capsule on them, whereas the corpuscle would. You can see the corpuscles in the papillary region here, the Meissner corpuscles. And if we look deeper in the location of the dermis and even in the hypodermis, we will see more corpuscles which are larger. Again, they're also encapsulated nerve endings. They have a capsule, a wrapping around them. And those are the Pacinian corpuscles. I think there's probably one within the crack here, yes. So this one right here, it almost looks like bone when you look at it under the microscope, but it's not bone. It's a nerve ending. Okay? This right here is that Pacinian corpuscle. I have a microscope slide that's already focused in on this. The difference between these Meissner corpuscles and the Pacinian corpuscles, aside from their location, right? These are more superficial, these are more deep, is what sensation they're going to be responsible for sensing. Is it just light touch, like this? Or is it pressure? Okay, you can tell the difference when someone is being very nice and, rubbing the surface of your skin, or mom's mad at you and she's grabbing you by the arm and pulling you, in the other direction. So these Pacinian corpuscles are going to sense that pressure. You've got to put a lot of pressure on the surface of the skin to hit or stimulate this nerve ending down here. Whereas this one is very superficial, you don't need to put a lot of pressure. It's almost just this light touch. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Pacinian are encapsulated?
They are encapsulated, yes. Yep. Under the microscope, it actually looks like rings like this, almost like bone. The difference being, if this was bone, under the microscope, typically you'll see it as black and white. You'll be able to see the little spiders, the osteocytes, and you'll see many of these all around. In the skin, it's just this one, that's this whitish color. There's no black circle in the middle where the central canal or blood vessel would be, and all around it is going to be pink. So that's how you'll be able to tell the difference. Pacinian corpuscles are deep. They're closer to the hypodermis, so you might see adipose tissue around them. That'll be another indicator for you. The other thing that I want to point out with this particular slide is if you look closely at the epidermis. Okay, I showed you that there were blood vessels down here. The red and the blue, obviously, are the arteries and the veins. Do you see any of those in the epidermis? No. And in fact, oh, I have an itch. Right, so if I'm itching my skin, am I bleeding? No. I mean, could I? If I keep itching to the point at which I'm now scratching away all of the stratum corneum and deeper layers of epithelial cells, then I could bleed. But if I just get a simple paper cut, or if I just scratch, normally on the surface of my skin, I'm not bleeding. The epidermis is avascular. It does not have blood vessels. There's no blood vessels here. If you get a wound and you are bleeding from that wound, you know that you've cut through all those layers of cells we were looking at before. You've cut through all of the strata, and you've cut into the dermis. So that's where the blood vessels are. Questions on any of this so far? No. Okay. So we've talked about the hair follicle, the sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are oil glands. They're always near the hair follicle. The sweat gland over here is opening up to the surface of the skin. In particular, this sweat gland is called an eccrine sweat gland because it opens up to the surface of the skin. There are these sweat glands as well that open into a hair follicle. Those are called apocrine sweat glands. Your book makes a distinction between the two of them. For the lab practical, it's just sweat gland. That would be fine.
Can you say that again?
Okay, sure. Yep, there's two types of sweat glands that you can see here from the figure. You can see the eccrine sweat gland, which opens up on the surface of the skin as the pores, the one I was talking about before. And then you can see this sweat gland over here, which is called an apocrine sweat gland, and it opens up into the hair follicle. Follow this up, it goes right behind here and opens up into the hair follicle. That's called an apocrine sweat gland. For our purposes, for the lab practical, really I will show you the eccrine sweat gland, so you don't have to write eccrine sweat gland, you can just write sweat gland. All right, I think that's pretty good for this. So take a look at the model, and you can compare it to the figure that's here, and also the figure that I gave you in the lab packet, because I did put a picture of this model in there, maybe towards the end of your packet. Can everyone see the epidermis?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see the strata? The layers of the epidermis? The top layer is the stratum corneum. Then there's a clear, transparent, it almost looks yellowish layer. That's the stratum lucidum. Then there's this darker layer where the cells are filled with granules, stratum granulosum. Then a larger layer with many layers of cells that are large and they kind of look like they have spines, even though they really don't. The stratum spinosum. And then the deepest layer is a darker color. Clearly see the nucleus in each of them. That's the stratum basal or basal. So all of these are the strata of the epidermis. And this side, they've removed the epidermis. Okay, so you can see the beginning of the papillary region of the dermis. These are all the papilla. Inside the papilla, right here, is a Meissner corpuscle. It has a yellow border to it. Yellow, always equate it with nervous tissue. Aside from adipose tissue, that's yellow. Okay, so here's the Meissner corpuscle for touch. At the very bottom, this one here, it's large, it's deep. This is the Pacinian corpuscle for pressure. You can see the blood vessels and some more nerves. This structure in white, any guesses? That's a sweat gland. That's a sweat gland. And then on the sides of the hair follicle, that's the sebaceous gland. Good. And this muscle, smooth muscle, it's called erector pili. Good, good. Okay. Now, on the side of the model, you can see another Pacinian corpuscle. Can you all see that? It hasn't been cut open though. And on this side of the model, because you'll see this anyway, no matter how I point it out to you, are labels. It tells you the strata, it tells you the epidermis and the dermis, as well as the hypodermis, so you can equate as you move across. Obviously, when I give the practical, I will cover this up because I know it's there. Okay, yeah. All right, so questions on this one? Professor Frost is giving her practical now, so I think she's using some of the other skin models. But I did give you a few pictures within the lab handout. You should be able to label all of the structures that we've just gone through. Questions on any of that? The purple one? This top? Corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basal. Yes, you do need to know the strata, and yes, you do need to know them in order. I did focus a few slides in already, and I do want to give you some time to look at those because they will be on your practical next class. I believe I put 2 slides over here, a slide in the back, and a slide at this table. So you're going to look at thick skin, you will look for the strata, you'll be able to see the stratum basal, you'll look for the Pacinian corpuscle. They are on the slide. Yep. So take a look at the slides, let me know if you have questions.
On the yellow handout instead, if you go on the website and put those numbers, it will give you the exact picture in color. I did that for the other one, all the tissues. It's really cool, like, and it tells you exactly what it is too.
Isn't this blood?
Yeah.
She didn't change it.
She didn't change this one. Are you all done with this?
Professor?